He was called the most magnificent dragon ever to fly the skies of Westeros. His scales were bright as beaten gold, and his flame came out the color of his own body, so that when he breathed fire he was briefly wreathed in the sun. His king called him King Aegon's Glory, and the story of his life is the slowest, cruelest ruin any dragon in the histories was ever made to suffer. Welcome to Westeros Within, where we journey into forgotten ages, hidden legends, and ancient mysteries. This is Dragons of Westeros, Episode 11, Sunfyre, the golden dragon who would not die. His egg hatched on the Dragonmont, the great smoking mountain that rises out of Dragonstone. They placed it in a cradle beside a newborn prince. The prince was Aegon, the firstborn son of King Viserys I by his second wife, Alicent of Oldtown. The dragon cracked his shell in the warmth of volcanic stone, and when he was old enough for a rider, the boy was already waiting for him. They grew up together, a gleaming golden dragon and a golden prince. And long before either of them understood what the word would come to mean, the realm had already begun to call the beast by his title, Sunfyre the Golden. He was not the largest dragon in his stable. Vhagar was older and many times his weight. Meleys was broader and bloodier. But for sheer beauty, no chronicler placed any above him. His wing membranes were pale pink, soft as rose petals, so that when he flew above the clouds the light came through them, and he seemed to glow. His eyes were amber, his frills were orange as a sunset. And when small folk saw him pass above the Red Keep, they did not say a dragon had flown by. They said a piece of the sun was flying. That was the beast in his prime. When King Viserys died in his bed, the Greens moved before the news could reach Dragonstone. Alicent and Sir Criston Cole set the crown on Aegon's head in the dragon pit itself, and the roaring of the penned dragons was the music of that coronation. On the banners of the new king, a golden three-headed dragon was raised in place of the ordinary red Targaryen sigil. That was Sunfyre. That was the claim made visible. Aegon was king because the dragon said so. When word reached Rhaenyra on Dragonstone, she miscarried her child, and the dance of the dragons began. For the first weeks, the golden dragon was held back. He was the living flag of a usurper king, and too precious to risk. But the hour of his testing was already marked, and the man who marked it was Sir Criston Cole. Cole devised a trap. He marched a land army to the castle of Rook's Rest and laid siege to Lord Staunton, who was sworn to the Blacks. He waited for Rhaenyra to send a dragon to save them, knowing that Aegon on Sunfyre and Prince Aemond on Vhagar would be hidden in the clouds above when that dragon came. The dragon who answered was Meleys the Red Queen, and her rider was Rhaenys Targaryen, the queen who never was. She came alone, straight and proud, to break the siege. Meleys was old, her scales the colour of burnished blood, and Rhaenys had been told her whole life that the throne should have been hers. She burned 800 of Cole's men where they stood, and then the trap fell on her. Vhagar dropped out of the high sky first, a shadow older than the kingdom. Sunfyre came from another angle, golden and screaming. 2 dragons on one. But Meleys was the Red Queen. She turned into them. She tore Sunfyre's chest open with her claws. He bit back, closed his jaws on one of her horns, and ripped it free. She closed her jaws on his neck. They grappled in the air like beasts in a pit. Then Aemond on Vhagar saw his opening, and he took it. Vhagar poured her ancient fire down onto both grappling dragons at once. She burned the Red Queen, she burned her own brother's mount, and all 3 of them fell out of the sky together. Meleys died on the ground in a cloud of broken earth. Rhaenys died on her back. Sunfyre, one wing half torn from his body by Meleys' death grip, his chest laid open, his golden scales burning from Vhagar's fire, crashed into a stand of trees with his king still in the saddle. When the men of the army came stumbling through the smoke, they found Aegon pinned beneath his own dragon's body. His hip was broken, his ribs were broken, his legs were broken. Half of him was scorched. The beauty that had made Sunfyre famous across the realm was ruined in a single afternoon. The Masters said he would die of his wounds in days. The Masters were wrong. For many months, the world lost track of him. His torn wing eventually mended, but it did not mend straight. It healed at a crooked angle, the bone weak, so that from then on he could manage only short, struggling hops through the air. He hunted fish along the coast. He took sheep from villages. He slept in volcanic hollows, alone, waiting for a human who had been carried off on a litter to a capital he could no longer fly to. And in that loneliness, he killed Grey Ghost. Grey Ghost was one of the wild dragons of the Dragonmont, a shy silver-pale creature, the colour of morning mist, who had never accepted a rider and had never in his life been known to kill a man or another beast. He lived in a smoking vent high on the mountain and fed on fish he snatched from the narrow sea. He had harmed no one, ever. The crew of a Volantene merchant ship called the Nessaria, becalmed off the coast, saw two dragons locked in combat above the Dragonmont. One was pale as smoke, the other was gold. When fisherfolk rowed around the mountain the next morning, they found the pale one torn open on the rocks below, his silver scales dark with blood. Sir Robert Quince, the Castellan of Dragonstone, was a fat and jolly man and no historian. He heard the sailor's tale and he made the wrong guess. He said the cannibal had killed Grey Ghost and he rested on it, and he was wrong. It was Sunfyre. The golden dragon had come out of his hollow and killed a quiet creature in his own home, not in battle, not in defense. He killed because he was starving and alone, and there was no king to feed him. His king, by then, was hiding on the same island. Aegon II, crippled and in pain, had been smuggled in disguise to Dragonstone by a bastard knight named Sir Marston Waters. The plan was absurd and brilliant. Hide the usurper on his enemy's home ground. Marston had kin on the island, an aged fisherman uncle called Tom Tanglebeard, a stammering cousin called Tom Tangletongue. The two Toms took the disguised king into their cottage and swore he was a poor relation made homeless by the sack of Spicetown. It was Tom Tangletongue who bought ale for the Volantene sailors in the port and heard them whisper of a golden dragon above the Dragonmont. A golden dragon on Dragonstone. Aegon wept when they told him. He had mourned Sunfyre as dead since the day the trees at Rook's Rest closed around them both. Now, half crippled, hunted in his own blood's castle, he insisted they take him into the wild parts of the island at once. Sir Marston, the two Toms, and a limping king climbed through volcanic steam and broken stone until they found him. A golden shape in a hollow, scabbed, scarred, one wing hanging wrong. But when he lifted his great head and saw his rider, he knew him. The cruel king threw his arms around the dragon's neck and wept into his scales, and the dragon nuzzled him in return. It is the one tender moment in the whole of this story. Day by day, Aegon climbed into the saddle and tested the crippled wing. Short flights first, then longer. By the time Sir Alfred Broom, a turncoat inside the castle walls, opened a postern gate in the darkness that comes before dawn, the golden dragon could carry his king into the air one more time. What followed, the old chronicles call the Fall of Dragonstone. Sir Robert Quince was killed at his own table. The greens poured into the halls of the castle, and above the yards, a small green and pearl dragon rose into the sky to meet the Golden King. Her rider was Lady Rhaenyra Targaryen, 14 years old, the daughter of Daemon and Lena. Her dragon was Moondancer. Moondancer was no larger than a warhorse and weighed less. But she was very quick. She darted beneath Sunfyre's grasping claws. She raked him from above and opened a long, smoking wound down his back. She tore again at his injured wing. And then Sunfyre opened his mouth and loosed a furnace blast of golden flame so bright it lit the yard below like a second sun. and the fire took Moondancer full in the eyes and blinded her. Blinded, she did not flee. She charged him. They collided in the air and they fell together. As they fell, she struck at his neck over and over, tearing mouthfuls of flesh from him. He sank his claws into her belly. 20 feet from the ground, the king hurled himself from the saddle rather than be crushed beneath the golden body, and both his legs shattered on the stones of the yard. Moondancer's speed was useless on the ground. Sunfyre's weight crushed her, and when at last the dust settled, the golden dragon loosed a shriek of victory so loud the sailors in the port heard it, and then he collapsed onto the yard beside her, and he never rose from it again. He had lost his right eye. He had lost the use of what wing was left to him. He was a one-eyed, flightless, stinking ruin, and this is how he spent his last days. Some weeks later, Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen arrived at Dragonstone by ship, fleeing the mobs of King's Landing. She stepped off the ship expecting sanctuary. What she found was Sir Alfred Broom and a circle of greens and a vast golden shape lying in the outer yard like a decaying gold rug. They dragged her before the dragon. Sunfyre, wounded and distracted by his food, did not at first notice her. And so Sir Alfred Broom drew his dagger and pricked her breast to draw blood. The smell of it woke the amber eye. The great head lifted. The golden flame came. Fire and blood says it plainly. Sunfyre devoured Queen Rhaenyra Targaryen in 6 bites and left nothing of her but her left leg below the shin. Her youngest son, Aegon the Younger, 10 years old, was made to watch his mother eaten alive by a dragon. Her handmaid, Elinda Massey, was driven mad by what she saw, and the chronicles say that she gouged out her own eyes afterward so that she would never see anything again. The dragon, who had once been called the most beautiful in the world, was now a torture device in the hand of a broken king. And that king, who could not walk, had himself carried out into the yard every day to sit beside him and beg him to eat. Sunfyre would not eat. His wounds stank. Flies came to them. The gold of his scales darkened around the many gashes. The great body deflated. The amber eye dulled. By his last days, he was no larger than a warhorse and weighed less. On the 9th day of the 12th moon of 130 AC, the magnificent golden dragon that had been King Aegon's glory died in the outer yard of Dragonstone, where he had fallen. His grace wept. Within weeks of the dragon's death, Aegon II himself was dead, poisoned, by hands close enough to reach his cup. The king and the beast had begun their lives together on the Dragonmont, and they ended in the same season, in the same castle, within sound of the same sea. The most beautiful dragon in the histories of the world was ruined, piece by piece, across a year, in plain view of men. His beauty was stripped from him while he still breathed, and then he was allowed to rot. So tell me this, if Aegon had never climbed into that saddle at Rook's Rest, do you think Sunfyre would have lived? Write it in the comments. And if you want more stories from the dragons of Westeros, the ones who rose before our history and the ones who died after, subscribe to Westeros Within and join me for the next chapter. Because next time, we follow a dragon the colour of sea foam and pale silver grey, the Mount of Laenor Velaryon, who saw his rider murdered and then waited 9 years alone on the cliffs of Driftmark without a master. Against every tale the masters knew, against every law of how the bond was supposed to work, he accepted a second rider in the worst year of the war, a bastard boy from the smoke of Hull. And the story of what they did together, and of the single word that was carved on the stone of his rider's tomb, is one of the strangest and most tender chapters in the whole of the dance. His name was Sea Smoke, and the word on the stone was loyal.